the West Coast, the East Coast, and deep in the heart of Texas. It's the Geek at Arms podcast with Brian, Mike, and James.
Welcome to Geek at Arms, a podcast camped squarely at the crossroads of geek culture and Christian faith. Hello, I am not James, and these are my co-hosts, Mike and Brian. How are you guys today?
I'm doing fantastic because I'm here at the table with you instead of being way, way far away in California.
And I'm doing pretty amazing. Like, joy, we're at the digital table. This is fantastic. I mean, I miss James, like listeners. James is not going anywhere, but this is great.
Yay, me too. It's about time. It's only been, how many episodes?
5 years, something like that.
Okay, so we'll do this and I'll see you in another 5.
No. I'll text James and say, hey, James, I'm actually at the airport. I need help. Can you run and get me? Okay, Joy, jump on the mics. We're good. Let's go. Let's roll with this episode.
Sweet.
Every month, something comes up.
But no one tell him when he edits this podcast, he will never guess.
I suddenly see the flaw in my brilliant plan.
Rats.
All right, so shall we head to Geek Out?
Let's. I'll go first. So as listeners may be aware, we've made a couple announcements on Twitter and on Facebook, but James and I have started yet another podcast called Woolheads, and we are reviewing the second season of Wheel of Time, episode by episode, and having a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah.
And it kind of snuck up on us. We'd been talking about this for a year, and we knew that season 2 is coming eventually. And then suddenly they dropped 3 episodes on us, and we had to just do them all at once. So there's been a lot of activity in podcasting for us the past week.
Yeah, I am just a little bit salty that I wasn't invited, despite the fact that I have no prior contact with the property, had not read any of the books, or any intention of watching any of the seasons. Okay, yeah, okay, fair.
Yeah, it's something that we'd kicked about, and then, oh, hey, season 2 is coming. Are we actually going to do this? And we decided we were. So I registered a domain name. We got another podcast feed set up and made a logo, and there it is.
I actually started listening. It's actually kind of fun, despite the fact that I have absolutely no frame of reference for what on earth is going on. So I'm sure that for people who enjoy the property, this is actually going to be a much more enjoyable experience.
Okay, so don't tell James, but I've only listened to the first one because I haven't had a chance to watch any of the shows. Well, I take that back. I did have a chance to watch the first episode with Brian and James, and I might have fallen asleep. Not because of the show, but because it was late.
It was late.
Small children and all that. But, take from that what you will.
No, I think that Alan and MinMax will still back you up one way or the other.
So other than the new podcast, I have been spending all of my free time playing Baldur's Gate 3.
That looks like that is quite a game.
It is living up to the hype. It's an extremely extensive game. There's so much to do, so many people to talk to. It actually makes speak with animals useful. You can talk to any animal in the game. Rats, rabbits, oxen. And sometimes they give you clues. Sometimes they give you useful information. So you got to go around and talk to the animals in addition to all the people. And sometimes you get to talk to the corpses with Speak with Dead.
I hear that there's even a romance option with an NPC that's a bear.
Well, the NPC is a druid who turns into a bear. I have not explored that particular romance path. I'm given to understand that, like many of the other romance paths, it's a little pornographic, which, if it's truly involving a bear, is disturbing.
It's horrifying.
Yes. The Githyanki was bad enough. But
I mean, I've watched the first half of Cocaine Bear, so the imagination is just running wild. I'm saving the other half to watch with a child, so still do recommend. But this is your Geek Out. Go right ahead.
I really like that it's got most of the problems have multiple possible solutions. Swinging a sword at it isn't always the best move. Sometimes it's the only available move depending on what you've done or what you want to happen, but it's not always the case. Like there was one particular hard fight that I kept losing, so I looked for a different option in the conversation, and at one point my opponent left the room and walked across this little bridge, and I noticed that I could interact with the bridge by attacking it. So I cut the bridge while she was walking across, and down into the hole she went.
I was going to say this sounds different than Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, where you're basically murder hobos, but no, that still applies to this scenario.
Yeah, ultimately, a lot of those solutions do come out to murder hobo, one way or the other, but they don't have to necessarily.
But really, that's why we play Baldur's Gate, let's be honest.
If you don't murder people, you don't get to take their stuff.
I want the loot and the levels. Leave me alone.
Unfortunately, I couldn't get the loot from the person in the pit. So that was a disadvantage.
You know, I can only imagine just camping out at the bottom of the bridge, especially one where it's, what is your name? You know, that there. I mean, loot will just drop.
It's a little grisly getting to it. But I guess no worse than if you're taking it by running somebody through with your sword.
If the path is grisly, just talk to the druid. I'm sure he'll find a solution.
Gosh. Anyway, I'm about probably 2/3 of the way through it. I have no idea what I'm doing right now. All of my quests are vague. It's like, I know I'm supposed to be looking for stuff, but I don't know where I'm supposed to look for it at. So it's still engaging. I think they spent the lion's share of their effort on the first act, because that's what they could get. That's what they were offering to their beta testers and the early access people. So it really shows that there's a lot of depth in that first act, and it kind of drops off in the second and the third.
Do you think you would play it again with a different character type?
Oh, I'm absolutely going to play it through with a different character, just because I kind of dedicated myself to the NPCs that I was traveling with, and I haven't swapped them out for the others. So I want to get the other stories going too by using all the other NPCs.
What are you playing right now?
I am a deep gnome rogue named Mneris, and she's kind of a little freak, actually. She grasps for power, and she romanced the Githyanki, and yeah, she kind of surprises me and is like, "You're an icky little lady." She keeps putting these worms in her brain to get more powers.
That's icky.
Yes. So I'm not real impressed by her personally, but she is at least making the game fun.
I think we'll probably have the opportunity to delve into that a little bit later now, won't we?
So does your speak with animals work with the worms in her brain?
Oh my gosh.
No, it doesn't seem to. You never get the opportunity to talk to the mind flayer worm things, parasites.
Missed opportunity.
I mean, you get to talk to all the mind flayers that put them there. So I guess it's a hive mind thing. So I guess you're kind of talk to them, just not directly.
That's probably best.
Making notes for a new RPG. Skill ranks in talk to the worms in my brain.
If that pops up on your next roll for shoes, yeah, that'd be awesome. And frightening.
Oh my gosh, so many possibilities.
So that wraps it up for me. I'll turn it over to you, Mike.
I have decided that since I was taking some time off from doing like not actual reading, because there's still reading involved, from heavy textbooks, because I was waiting for my new glasses to come in, and which they have. Hooray, progressives reaching towards 50 need to get those prescriptions adjusted if you don't like headaches.
Yes.
So I was listening to some audiobooks, which I talked about last time, and I picked up a couple of graphic novels, one of which was The Last Ronin, which is the final chapter of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles storylines. The property's going to reboot 1,000 times, we know, but this was covering the idea that Michelangelo is the last remaining turtle, and his quest to go ahead and get revenge on, of course, the Foot Clan, because who else? And it's Shredder's grandson who's in charge and who's ultimately responsible for his brothers and his father's death. And just the close of his chapter in connecting with old friends and encountering old enemies. So it was really visually pretty impressive. I also, around a similar time, got the TMNT Ultimate. I'm not a huge Turtle fan. It's a nostalgic romp for me, so I'm not gonna, folks, I am not gonna pretend to be like some sort of master on the property or anything. But this is kind of where I was at the time, and it was kind of fun to see some of the things that popped up in the first 8 issues be part of the bookends of the close of the book. So it was, so I read the beginning and then read the end and skipped everything in the middle, basically. Who is this Karai person? Anyway.
I'm just envisioning an old Shredder. You hit him and his dentures go flying. Like they missed an opportunity.
How many times have they hit Shredder and made his dentures go flying? I mean, they turned him into a shark at one point. There's Crab Shredder and Shark Shredder because it got weird somewhere in the middle. He'd been killed I don't know how many times because it's comic books. Right. If you have a great villain, you have to kill them at least 18 times. But yeah,
now, did this follow on the continuity from the original Eastman and Laird, or the more recent? I don't remember. I haven't been keeping track with the variants of the Turtles.
Yeah, it did. Okay. Yeah, as in, I hear your question. And then, as in, I don't know.
Fair enough.
There's the original creators were both involved. Only one, I think, was involved in some of adapting some early notes of the writing, while the other was only involved in art capacity. So they've not both been working in the Turtle line for a while. My understanding is that there are some later storylines that it picks up on, and it kind of gives homage to the start, but it does not, it does not end evenly from where you saw things originally start. I mean, there are characters that I had no idea of, but they were apparently some big deals, and I didn't know that they were big deals until the character actually showed up as a DLC player in Shredder's Revenge. And I'm like, well, hold on. If this person Karai showed up here and is showing up in the video game, obviously something has happened that I'm not aware of. But there's been like 30 years worth of Turtle stuff. There's a lot that's happened that I'm not aware of. But I thought that it was some parts in the middle kind of dragged, but I thought that overall it was a fun story. It was engaging. It was interesting. And I kind of liked the closure of, okay, so this story has an end. They'll reboot it. They'll do more of it. I mean, it's a hot property. It's a franchise.
Well, and I think there's 3 simultaneous efforts at it right now, because there's a movie in theaters right now. There's at least one other comic book in addition to this. And I think there might still be a Nickelodeon show.
Oh, good for them then. Okay. So these guys are probably not hurting for money then.
I don't think they are, no.
Okay, good for them. Good for them.
Many comic artists are, but Eastman and Laird, I think, have made their bank.
Good. Good for them. I think. I don't know. Depends on what they do with it. Anyway.
I suppose.
They're not actually setting up criminal ninja organizations anywhere out there, are they? Because that'd be taking their... Well, one of them did buy a tank, didn't they? Okay, I'm pretty sure it was demilitarized.
Well, if we know about it, they're not doing it very well.
Yeah. Well, or they're doing it extremely well because ninjas are just that sneaky. The only other thing that's really on my geek radar is actually, have either of you been watching the Ahsoka show?
Yes.
How are you liking it? Or not?
I haven't had a chance to, so you go ahead. Yeah.
I like it a lot. I especially like Ahsoka's characterization. That you got this actiony show and you're expecting everyone to be high strung, but she is very much the meditative Jedi. Tail guns, please.
Yeah.
I'm just really enjoying her performance.
Yeah. It's funny because I don't really know why I turned it on. If you're talking about nostalgic Star Wars for me, I'm going to pop in, say, the Heir to the Empire audiobook. Like that, for some reason, hits all the right nostalgia for me. Like, I grew up with the original trilogy, but, like, I don't know. So the idea of going on a quest for Thrawn does not interest me. The idea of going on a quest for Ezra interests me even less. So these are characters or a plot hook I didn't ask for. A character that I thought was fun while I was watching the Clone Wars as an adult. Okay, she's cool. But really the interaction between Ahsoka and Sabine, I really like the idea of this being a mentor-mentee relationship. And especially with Ahsoka being so far developed from where she was at the end of Clone Wars to where she is now, feels like it's a grown, mature character. Sabine, on the other hand, seems like she's stagnated since Rebels. And I'm thinking that they stagnated her character and kept her impulsive, young, carefree with responsibility so that they can show how she develops during the course of the show. So watching this relationship, I think, has been what's keeping me interested, which I think is kind of a testament to the quality of the show when it's something that, as I said, none of these hooks interest me. I don't know why I turned it on, except for maybe I wanted to see lightsabers that day, but and still I'm keeping on coming back for more.
You know, I didn't really have a whole lot of interest because honestly, a lot of the latest properties that have come out, I'm just kind of Star Wars'd out. My daughter's interested because she has seen a lot of the Clone Wars. She is a huge Sabine fan. But then the other day, James showed me a clip of, I think it was Ahsoka talking with her droid and the sass that droid conveyed. And I thought, okay, I'm going to watch this just for him because right now he's my favorite character and I need to see his storyline.
Yeah.
A droid played by David Tennant.
I know. My favorite doctor. So
I'm finding it really interesting that they've got this character, Sabine, who's bad at being a Jedi.
Yeah.
Because so often your Jedi characters are larger than life. They're just awesome at everything. And Sabine's not.
Yeah.
The droid says, I've seen many Padawans over the centuries, and you are the worst. It kind of reminds me of something actually we just talked about in Woolheads, that there's a character that they've got in he's in the books, but he's not very well developed. But he's a warder, which are the bodyguards of the Aes Sedai, who are the sorceresses of the setting. But he's really bad at being a warder. He lasts like 5 minutes in his meditation. He can't stand have somebody running around in his head because they've got this kind of psychic connection. And I love this character because he's bad at his job.
Yeah, for as much as the Star Wars property started off with the depends on when you started and how old you are.
Yeah.
You have an everyman. Sabine, even though she is supposed to be this developed warrior, she does feel relatable because she has absolutely no connection. No, she doesn't have absolutely no connection. She does not have a natural talent with the Force. And for some reason, that makes her even the more intriguing. So yeah, that about wraps it up for me and my Geek Out. How about you, Joy?
My big one recently is just a couple weeks ago, James and I had the opportunity to go to the Lone Star Game Expo,
nice.
which had tabletop RPGs and minis. And it started on Friday and went through Sunday. And we have some amazing friends who basically earned their sainthood by watching our children the whole weekend. I don't know how we got these people in our lives, but yeah, I wouldn't watch my own children though. No, wait, I shouldn't say that. Let's delete that part.
No, that's staying in. That's for the internet.
Okay, then. Anywho, no, it was a really great experience. So you got to sign up for what games you wanted to do ahead of time. You know, when you arrived there's some games that still needed players, but we kind of split it between some board games and then some RPGs, which other than the infamous Hunt for the Danish that Mike, you took us on a few years back, I have not played in a crazy long time, which side geek out, because I haven't played in so long, I didn't have any dice, which meant, yes, unfortunately, I had to go to the local game store and buy several shiny new pairs of dice. I mean, such a bummer. And had to get a really cool new dice bag. So, I mean, sacrifices were made.
Mostly from your wallet.
And it only took me, I don't know how many times I sat there and spun the Chessex display trying to find that one perfect dice of, okay, I like this blue, but I don't like it with the gold. And so I need it with the silver, but they don't have the silver. And what about this? Yeah, I think James walked off at some point because it was hard. It was very hard to make these decisions.
Okay, I think that you and I need to hang out while James and Kaja go check out whatever else that they're doing, because I will sit there right there with you like, oh yeah, but look, they have this entire bucket of exactly that form of D4. So let's pick out which of these D4s goes exactly with the rest of your set. We would be terrible. That should not happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's important that your D6s, your set of D6s matches your set of the others or complements them, because otherwise you're not going to roll very well. Everybody knows this. All those people who get the bad rolls, it's because they have bad juju with their dice. So.
Because they didn't bring a glass of salt water with them to test the fairness of the dice.
You know... You see... Okay. Now... I would really like that tested empirically. Like, yes, the saltwater test is one form of empirical test, but how much do those air bubbles actually affect the averages of the roll if you roll the die like 1,600 times and write it down in a spreadsheet and then make charts?
But the con is only 3 days long.
And I was just going for pretty.
Well, I mean... Honestly, let's be real. There's no money on the table. Like, these cannot possibly be casino accurate dice, even with some of the most accurate dice on the market, unless you're spending something to the order of $150, $200 on a set, which between you and me, Joy, I'm not. So, you know, with the amount of times that we're rolling, if you're enjoying the pretty, enjoy the pretty, because I enjoy the pretty. And in the end, the math matters a little to me, but not enough for me to actually start saltwater testing, especially after I rolled those dice 1,600 times and compared them to each other and wrote it down. And we're not going to talk about that. Maybe I'll write a blog post. I said it on air, so the answer is no, I won't.
I mean, Mike, we know you're crazy, but let's watch what we're showing here. Let's tone it down a bit.
Okay, can we delete that part then?
No.
I'll discuss it. I'll discuss it with James.
You're going to tell James to keep it in, aren't you?
Anyway.
Yeah, that's what she's doing. Okay.
No, but so I got to play some board games that I've been eyeing on the shelves of my local game store for ages, but never quite wanted to shell out the money. The first one was the Red Dragon Inn, which was fabulous. I mean, the gameplay is the mechanics. Once you get them, it's fairly simple, and because you are either gambling, drinking, or forcing someone else to drink. So this is not really a child-friendly game, but just the how the characters are written and their different cards and just the flavor text really made it a lot of fun. So I think with the right group, this could be a really fun game. And it kind of reminded me of, there's this book that came out recently, and I just lost the name of it. It's about the orc who decides to, Legends and Lattes.
Oh, yes.
Yes. This game made me feel like Legends and Lattes. So if you have played one and not read the book, or vice versa, you should do so, because they go together. Except that you're not drinking lattes, but whatevs. And then the other game I got to play was one called Mice and Mystics. So this one is kind of like a tabletop RPG light. Like it's a really good intro for kids, but it has your minifigs. And it was just a lot of fun. Just the mechanics of it and the different characters. And there's a storyline that's pretty well defined. And plus our GM was phenomenal. Like you could tell he loved this game. He had painted all the minis to just this great detail, brought in all these extras. So I think part of the fun of it was just the game was a great game. And part of the fun was this GM who just really enjoyed sharing this game with other people. So those were the 2 board games that we played. And then the 3 tabletop RPGs we played was, we did one campaign with a 5th edition D&D, which, side note, I have not played D&D before, and I hadn't played an RPG for forever. And so, I was just asking some simple questions. And it's really fun to play the ignorant female and just watch all the men like mansplaining. Like
oh no.
I got so much enjoyment out of like pretending to be dumb and just letting them talk and listen to them expose their own ignorance.
No.
So mansplaining is you can tweak it to your own purposes. And then the other 2 games that we played 2 different Pathfinder adventures. One of them was just a one shot that was written by this local company called Cornerstone Games. And the game was called The Problem at Butterfield Pond. And I think the guy who wrote it was our GM. His name was Joseph. He was just a fabulous guy. And it was a really fun little one shot. And the other part that was fun is that it's getting to the end of it and him just looking at his script and saying, I didn't contemplate any of this, but this is amazing. So that was a great experience. And then the other one that was just a roll was called We Before Goblins. So the scenario is that there's 4 goblins and you are little toddler goblins and you haven't proven that you're good enough to be part of the goblin clan. So you and your 3 friends have to make your way into the bog and take a toad and present it to the scary unnamed person that lives in the house on the other side of the bog, and then return. And shenanigans ensue because all the rules when you are a goblin, all of there's a random traveler who just broke down on the side of the road. We should ambush her because that's what you do. Made it really fun. And the fact that you're kind of incompetent at everything you do is also pretty amazing.
Man.
So it was just a fabulous game scenario. So that's a good one for inexperienced gamers and people who just don't take themselves too seriously and just want to have a good time. So, well, that's it for my geek out.
Let's cycle back around just one quick second, because I was doing a little Googling while you were describing Mice and Mystics. That has table presence. So is this like a campaign in a box? Like, is this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the story is that the king got remarried to this new queen, and she actually is planning to poison him on their wedding night. You and a bunch of other friends, your teenagers, you guys are kind of exploring the lowest level of the castle just because you don't want to get sucked into doing chores. And you go by this room and you hear the queen talking about this to some of her guards and planning this out. Well, they open the door, they catch you, and it's to keep from being killed by these guards. One of your member decides to transmorph you into mice. So you escape down the sewers. Well, the queen is angry because you escaped. So she turns her guards into rats and they come after you.
Okay. So that's the setup. That's the hook. And so I'm assuming that the box comes with, a set number of stories, and you play through like a chapter a night or a chapter a week.
Yes.
How long does a single chapter take you to play through, or how long did it take you in a con setting?
I think it took about 2.5, 3 hours, you know, and some of that was the initial, you know, this is what the cards are and this is how the game works. But the story itself took a good while, and it was really engaging throughout. So it would be some storyline, and then you'd have the ability to search the room to get treasures. But there's consequences, because if you take too long to search, that's when your enemies creep up on you. And so you might have to fight a big bad that you weren't really ready for. And then you go to the next room, and there's a little bit more story arc and a lot more fighting. So it's really fun to play through. And like I said, there was a girl in our group who was maybe 11, and apparently anytime the GM had played this game at a con the last couple of years, she's gone and sat at his table because she was trying to explain the rules to us in her own way. And the GM was very patient, but you could tell he was kind of like, okay, just shut up. But he was so patient with her, like that. I gave him props for that, because I would have just pinched her little head. But, but yeah, it was, I would say, at the end, I kind of had one of those cards where, you know, the very end, you're trying to run across an open space, but not get attacked by the owls. And I had like this magic kind of get out of jail free card. And so I did play that just so we wouldn't die from all these owls, and because it was getting really late at night. But you know, you can spend a long time doing these scenarios. So yeah, I'd say it's a good way to get people, or, you know, children, or just people who've never played an RPG. It's a good intro, because you've got your board game mechanics, but then you have some RPG mechanics as well.
Or somebody, maybe if you just want to play Mouse Guard without actually playing Mouse Guard. Okay, got it.
Oh yeah. Your Redwall fans, definitely. And honestly, I've never done minifigs, but after playing with these, yes, give me all the paints and all the paintbrushes. I want to do this, and I'll hope that they actually turn out good, but they won't. So
until they do.
Started with a game that you only kind of like.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. I could start on my boys' action figures. They'll never notice.
Why does my G.I. Joe look like he's going to the Barbie movie? Never you mind, son. Never you mind.
Ken had to start somewhere.
Well, then shall we move on to our main topic?
I think we probably should. What is our main topic today?
Well, the question came up at some point. I don't even remember when or why, but we asked the question, what if our good guy isn't a good guy? Are all protagonists intended as role models, and what are the consequences of them having their own failings?
I guess I can handle this one pretty quickly. What if our good guy isn't a good guy? Well, they should be. Is every protagonist a role model? Yes. What are the consequences of not recognizing their failures? They don't have failures, because you wouldn't have written the book if they weren't a good guy. Well, that about wraps it up for Geek at Arms. Why don't we take us to the... No. Yeah, maybe I'll just go ahead and ask the question. Do you remember the first protagonist that you remember thinking that this isn't a great person?
I remember the first time I had a protagonist. It wasn't even something that I had to recognize. Maybe this guy isn't such a great person, because Thomas Covenant is a terrible person. From the first page of the first book, he doesn't do anything that I would consider admirable, noble.
Joy, I have a question, and I'm hoping I'm asking quiet enough that Brian doesn't notice.
He doesn't hear it.
Okay, who is Thomas Covenant?
So Thomas Covenant I have no idea.
Okay. Brian, who's Thomas Covenant?
As Thomas Covenant is the main character in The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever. This was a series of novels written by Stephen R. Donaldson in the 60s or 70s. Okay. I don't remember exactly when. The first one is called Lord Foul's Bane. And you'd think that Lord Foul is the bad guy, and he is, but Covenant competes with him for the title. He's terrible.
Okay. So he's just a protagonist that is just a terrible person.
Yes.
How old were you when you were reading this book? I'm just curious.
Too young. I think my dad handed it to me when I was 13 or something. And within the first couple of chapters, okay, so it's one of those modern man gets transplanted into a fantasy world kind of thing. And our protagonist has leprosy. And the first thing that happens to him when he winds up in this fantasy land is this woman finds him, he's injured, and she heals him. Not just of his injury, but of his leprosy. And he thanks her for this by sexually assaulting her.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, you'd mentioned this book earlier. Okay.
Yeah.
So now I remember. And yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is not a good guy.
And he doesn't get better until around book 6, when he finally kind of redeems himself. And he's the hero of the story because he possesses white gold. His wedding ring is made of white gold. And in this world, that's very magical. And so everybody thinks, this guy's the hero. He's going to save us all. But he's just awful.
Yeah, 13 does seem young for that.
Yeah, I don't know what my father was thinking.
I mean, I've never given anything to my children that I shouldn't have. Okay, anyway, moving on. So the first one that I thought of was Woody from Toy Story. I mean, when you're just kind of watching Toy Story, it's a great movie. It's a lot of fun. But when you think about it, Woody starts out as the leader, not because he has any great redeeming qualities, but because he's Andy's favorite. And he has that force of personality, and he has Andy's name on his foot. But once that position is challenged, he makes some pretty terrible choices. And at the end, it is kind of a redemption story where he realizes that, oh, okay, maybe I don't have to be the favorite. Maybe other toys can be too. But throughout most of the movie, all of these terrible scenarios and situations that they get into is because of his selfishness and his basically not being a great guy.
And I think that Pixar has been very good at avoiding typical kids' movies tropes, that they can have this protagonist that we see grow. In most stories, the protagonist has to learn something, but they don't have to become morally better necessarily. And Pixar really broke the mold in a lot of their storytelling that way, starting from the very beginning with Woody.
Yeah, some of their molds I wish they hadn't broke, because I did some of those movies. I just cried way too much. Like, what? Why am I paying you money so that I can cry? I don't like this.
It's cheaper than the therapist.
Well, unless...
Yeah. Yeah, but it's interesting because I had a friend who had this conversation with their kid. Part of it was like, they're showing this film, it's Cars, and like, okay, now we're going to see how the protagonist grows as a person. And the child had a really, really hard time seeing that Lightning McQueen grew as a person, because he thinks that all of the gruff that everybody around him is giving him is because they're bullies. And it's because Lightning McQueen is the main character. He's the fast car. He's obviously the best guy. They're like, no, he's not. They're not being mean. They're responding to him being terrible. So parents are starting the therapy early, and sometimes kids just aren't getting it. Who would have figured?
What about you? What's your first
encounter with not a good guy? There had to be others that were earlier, but the one that I'm thinking back, like, what was the earliest that I can remember? Like, wow, this guy is really just a human turd. Was Ash from Army of Darkness. Because, I mean, he's sarcastic, he's quick-witted, but he's also impatient, he's unwise, he's brash. And the one thing that makes him a good protagonist is 75, at least 63% of the time, he is being sarcastic to the right person, or at least under the right condition.
I think that's a virtue, honestly. I don't see what your problem is. Yeah, that just made me think of Shaun of the Dead. I mean, there's not a whole lot of great anything that you can pull from that, except that it's funny. But yeah, the two protagonists on that are not really great guys. Yeah, there's nothing about their lives that you want to emulate.
It's interesting. I was just watching Taken with my dad. He's like, "Oh, this is a great movie. We got to watch it." And we're watching it. And I'm like, of course. I'm like, I'm thrilled. Like, yeah, let's watch an action movie with my dad. And here's Liam Neeson's character, whose name I don't remember. And he's going through the streets and brothels of Paris. And, you know, he's beating up and shooting a lot of people, like based on evidence that he's strung together. And I'm thinking, the only thing that makes this guy watchable is that we as an audience are buying that he's beating up the right people. Mm-hmm. And like, if you try to apply this to the real world, that doesn't, I mean, that you cannot emulate this, because you're convinced you're right. You go in and you shoot a bunch of people, and a good number of them die. And then you go to prison forever. The end. Not an exciting movie.
Except if you're Malcolm Reynolds, because he's another one that I think about. You know, he's charismatic, but he's had a rough past, and he does a lot of things that are kind of questionable. But I mean, let's just be honest. I've justified any of his misdeeds in my head because Malcolm Reynolds. Come on, guys.
Okay, yeah, but like let's kind of peel back the layer on that. Like, why do you feel the need to justify his crimes and misdemeanors?
I think because he's just a likable person. You can kind of empathize with the whole, I'm just trying to survive. I'm just trying to get along. And, you know, life was going okay until y'all just showed up and ruined it. And yeah, he makes some questionable choices, but wouldn't we all, you know, shoot people with blue hands? So I think it's a lot of it is his likability and the ability to empathize with his situation of being the underdog and trying to help his friends and being loyal to his crewmates.
And anybody who's ever dealt with a bureaucracy at all wants to just get in a ship and fly away and shoot anybody that tries to follow.
I think that it's interesting because we, at least on some level, started with a default of, okay, protagonists are role models. So where does this idea come from that a protagonist must be a role model?
Saturday morning cartoons. I don't know. It's something I've noticed lately that people are looking up to figures that are meant to be cautionary. Like if you look at recent takes on Batman and people lionizing the horrible things that he's doing, it's like, it's not even the Batman that is a hero. It's this more brutal Batman. And yet people are still looking at him and saying, I wish I could be more like that. It's like, I wish they were looking at the Batman from the 50s and saying, I wish I could be more like that, not Christopher Nolan's Batman.
I feel like the more recent Batman is like the Punisher, but with better PR.
Yeah.
Well, again, I think that's the one thing is that we have it set. I think that we kind of have the 50s Batman in our head. Like, okay, Batman's the good guy because we grew up with, well, I mean, I grew up with Adam West, so maybe I am not the person to turn to where the violence was all with pow, crash.
Maybe Kevin Conroy.
And I think that there's something about the idea that, yes, it's Batman. He's good. And we haven't stopped to question that to evaluate what's on the screen, because I think that what makes Nolan's Batman watchable, or maybe even the most recent The Batman, when he's fighting the Riddler, is that we as the audience are sure he's beating up the right people. Like, you don't have this club where they just said, all right, Jimmy, well, welcome to your first day as a bouncer. Now, what you need to do here is basically crowd control. You don't need to make any really important decisions. We're going to go ahead and handle those for you. So anybody who's causing trouble, we need you to stop them from causing that trouble and then hang up the rest of us. And then some guy in a bat costume is coming through punching everybody. And Jimmy says, oh, it's my first day. This looks like a problem that I need to stop. And now Jimmy needs bridge work. But it's interesting that we have this idea of the good Saturday morning, old-fashioned heroes being role models. And I've had a similar experience of people taking a cautionary tale and saying it's a role model, as it applies, in my field in the ministry. Let's talk a little bit about that, because this, I think that people sometimes try to get nostalgic and say, oh, back in the good old days, our good guys were good and our bad guys were bad. And we didn't have any of this muddy, complicated characters. Like, okay, are you telling me that Samson's a guy that you look up to? Like this guy... This guy who is a routine oath breaker, who is having, I would say, non-emulatable relations with his girlfriends, plural. And yeah, there's just nothing. Okay, and he also has like really bad puns. I mean, especially if you're reading the Hebrew, it's really, really awful. Why do you need to take, just because they're a biblical figure and they're the protagonist, to say that we should emulate this? Because we really shouldn't. I think that I even had somebody recently on a Christian D&D board say, "Okay, well, I'm thinking of if we were going to make Samson a D&D character, we'd make him a paladin, right?"
Oh, yikes!
Right. So I've had some complaints that I've seen that fictional characters are not being good role models, and the critic just assumes that they're supposed to be pillars of virtue, which I don't think that the narrative supports.
Yeah. I had a conversation with my ex-wife once, and she was talking about Elsa from Frozen. And I don't remember the exact context of the conversation because I hadn't seen Frozen at the time, so I didn't have anything to offer her. But I think that she missed the point that even though Elsa is the central character, she's kind of the monster in the story. Let It Go is not a hero's anthem. The lyrics say, no right, no wrong, no rules for me. That's not the moral lesson that you're drawing from the film.
It's funny because I heard people complaining about that song because it was teaching children that there is no such thing as right and wrong. And I'm like, I think that's a character moment, not a takeaway.
Yeah, this is the villain song.
I think that when we're younger, we like to put our narratives in good guy who is all good and bad guy who is all bad categories. And it's easy to see when we're telling fables or morality tales, but not all tales are fables or morality plays.
Mm-hmm. And maybe that's why Frozen brought up the conversation, since it does have its target audience is young.
And that's a good point, because younger target audiences, they are still learning black versus white. Shades of gray are very hard for them to understand and very hard to explain to them. And so while I think having a character who's conflicted provides more realism in some aspect and is definitely a better fleshed out story from the storytelling perspective, I think for a child's movie, it can pose some really difficult problems of, okay, well, Elsa's the queen. Why would she be bad? You know, how do you explain to your child that she makes beautiful ice palaces and she can do all these awesome things and she's the queen, but okay, maybe she's not a good person, you know, and a lot of her choices are not ones that I want you making.
Right. And it's not as though she has any sort of malice involved. Mm-hmm. She has no ill will. She's just done and free for the first time and just blind to basically just blind to the consequences of her actions at that juncture in her life. So, yeah, I think that makes it hard for them to say, you know, oh, she's a bad guy. I don't think that she's bad. She's
that's why I said
everyone.
That she's the monster and not the villain.
Oh, exactly. I fundamentally agree with her as sympathetic monster. Mm-hmm. But I think that once we get into stepping into this child perspective, sometimes it's hard to see the difference between the monster and the villain.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to really emphasize the end of the story more than the middle. You have to say, look at where she wound up. And she had to go through these things to be able to get there. But that's the important. This is what you want to emulate is I have to make the effort to fix my mistakes.
Yeah.
Not that I will never make mistakes.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, is every protagonist intended to be a role model? Is that the point of fiction?
Absolutely, yes. That's the reason why I watched I watched the reason why I watched the series Wednesday is because I thought she was an amazing friend. She would be a wonderful person to hang out with. Like, this is also kind of the crazy thing. These people are interesting to watch. Wednesday Addams was fantastic on screen. In the new representation, she would be a nightmare in a friend group. Kvothe, as much as I love Name of the Wind and the Wise Man's Fear, as much as I hope I'm going to love the Doors of Stone, I don't want him in my friend group.
Yeah, every once in a while I see one of those things where they've divided up like Marvel characters onto tables in the cafeteria and says, which table are you sitting at? No, none of those people. I don't want to be anywhere close to them.
I'm trying to think of it. Oh, Captain America. I think I might sit at his table. I still think
at some point masonry is going to rain down and kill everybody around him.
Oh, shoot. Yeah. Can I have the personality without the big, attractive target for danger? And yeah. Okay. I want to be in the next state. And is it the fact that these people are enjoyable to watch that sometimes clouds our judgment as to whether or not they're good or role models or even halfway decent people?
I mean, yeah, I think so. Like you look at the huge following that some of these influencers get, and if you actually pay attention to what they're saying or doing, like these are really self-centered. A lot of the, I'm painting with a broad brush here, but
sure.
A lot of them are very self-centered people, but because they have something that maybe you want, like the popularity or the money or whatever, you tend to gloss over how they got there and how they're acting with it. So I think sometimes when you have a likable character on the screen, you want to like them, and therefore you don't really want to see their flaws. You're focused on the kind of like the Malcolm Reynolds. Okay, yeah, I mean, yeah, he did shoot that officer, and yeah, they did steal the drugs from the government, but he's Malcolm Reynolds, so it must be right?
Yeah, I think that we get caught up a lot in that feeling towards that character that gets or feelings in these narratives, and it clouds us to recognizing their failures. So I guess here's the next question. What are the consequences of not recognizing these people's failures? And one of the ones that my wife and I had been preaching through some of our narratives in Genesis following the lectionary, we kind of had some of these, basically treating them as family stories. And sometimes the stories that we tell of our family to our children and our grandchildren aren't necessarily there to say, this was my best moment, or this was Aunt Linda's most amazing moment, or this is when my mom had done blah, blah, blah. Not because this was right, but because it's, what happened. And there are a lot of opportunities in Genesis to see some of these, what we like to see as they are patriarchs, and I don't want to call them heroes of the faith because they weren't. They made a lot of mistakes. They did a lot of awful things. And especially if we kind of whitewash it in some of our translations, the text doesn't provide the commentary when it presents the protagonist doing something awful. And because it doesn't comment to say, and now, children, stealing that from your brother is bad. Stealing the gods from your uncle is bad. Continuing to, lie repeatedly about your wife is bad. Sending your child out with only a water skin and surely they're going to die in the desert is bad. They don't say it. And so sometimes I think there's a compulsive need to make these people spotless protagonists. And if we do not look at their failings and call them the sins that they are, it makes it a lot easier to look at ourselves and say, well, we can overlook my failings because we're so well practiced at it.
Yeah, and I think we tend to justify things saying, well, I mean, yeah, that's what happened, but it was okay because this or that or the other, when no, sometimes people that you look up to make bad choices or do awful things. And that doesn't mean that, and I think that kind of kills the, I want to be this perfect person. And if we recognize that these heroes or whomever it is, someone that we look up to, had these massive failings, like, oh shoot, what does that say about me? You know, I'm not to that level of faith. I didn't do all that. And they did this awful thing. They murdered this person, or they, you know, whatever, you know, oh man, that
they danced
yikes.
in victory till their underwear was on display before the entire kingdom.
That is why I do not watch football. Just saying.
Well, I was talking about 2 Samuel, but, you know, I see a lot of parallels. Yeah, I think that it's interesting, especially, you know, I'll go ahead and pick up that 2 Samuel thread, is because there's, especially as we're talking about like a figure like David, because, okay, he's the king over united Israel in Judah. And there is this dynasty of the Davidic line. And yeah, there's a lot of amazing things going on with this character, with this figure. But especially in that story, when he's dancing with victory, like, he's a king. He has a certain position and standing. And I don't know exactly what sort of dance in which your undergarments are on display. I have not danced thusly. But his wife says, hey, look, you can't comport yourself like this. And he replies, well, I was dancing for the Lord. And that's just kind of the final say. Now, you can easily say, like, okay, well, he showed her. Like, he had the answer. What he was doing was righteous because he said it was righteous. And the narrator never jumped in to say, and lo, it was not righteous. A lot of it, Morgan Freeman did not step in the narrative to say, and yet it was not righteous, that we wind up taking his side because he's David.
Yeah, the Blues Brothers are on a mission from God too. Right.
But they made a bunch of Nazis jump into the water, so
so they must be okay too.
They must be the good guys.
Yeah, if you just look around Twitter for conversations about David, you can see how terrifying this can be. Because there's this whole thing that goes on with people trying to say that Bathsheba was at fault for that whole situation where he effectively forced himself on her, whether that was actually doing so with the force of his presence or just because, hey, I'm the king and you have to obey, and then murders her husband. And people are saying, well, yeah, but it's David, so that was all the correct thing to do.
Yeah, but it's Harvey Weinstein, and we love his movies.
Right. And I just have to wonder, if you're a woman overhearing this conversation, how terrifying that has to be. And I recognize I'm saying this from multiple layers of privilege that I enjoy.
Right.
It's just, it turns my stomach.
Yeah, I think people get so focused on, I like this character, therefore he must be perfect, therefore it really has to be the victim's fault because I wouldn't like somebody who does these bad things because I'm not a bad person. So it's hard to acknowledge that maybe the person that I do like has some serious flaws. I mean, you see that in contemporary situations all the time with star athletes or celebrities or politicians. You know, I like this person, therefore whatever they did can't be that bad.
There's the sympathetic character that makes us feel a certain way. So we immediately feel the need to cover up some of the, well, yeah, but what was the context in which he murdered 18 children?
Yeah, I think that, you know, after you mentioned this about David and his dance, I mean, it's really hard when you're reading that, when you're teaching that Bible story to children and they're like, oh, this is really bad. But then someone tries to justify that it's good. I think you're absolutely right. If we aren't careful in recognizing that, okay, maybe this quote unquote hero did make some pretty terrible choices, it really can confuse the issue for people who are reading it the first time or children. And either as a child, they believe you and then they don't, they lose the ability to recognize that good people can make bad choices.
Yeah.
And they think that you're supposed to justify that.
Yeah.
Whereas for, someone who's an adult coming in and reading this the first time, if, somebody tries to justify it to them, they start thinking, what am I reading? And what are you guys doing? Like, this is crazy.
Really what you believe?
Yeah. What kind of a person are you? So I think ignoring that and putting on blinders to, our ability to rewrite history to protect someone that we like or that we prefer, it can absolutely cause huge problems for children, for the victims.
And also, let's reflect on not all scripture is suited for children of early years. Some of it may not even be suited for polite company. I would refer to Ezekiel 23. Won't reference the specific verse, but read through it. You'll be fine. This is for adult viewership only. But yeah, I think that there is some level of really appreciating these role model figures who are role models. I can think of a few really good characters. And I think that there's a certain level of training and experience and maturity that has to come. The ability to critically analyze what are these sympathetic individuals doing, and does the fact that I'm sympathetic necessarily make them admirable?
I think one book, and this is not biblical, but one book that I feel like is super dangerous because you like the protagonist is the Twilight series. When I first read those, I was on a work trip and I, had the evenings and weekends free. And so I was tearing through them. They're very well written. I mean, ignore the movies, blah. But the books themselves are very quick and easy to read. They're compelling. There's a love story. And then a couple weeks later, so I was an auditor at the time, and I was working with this nonprofit that reached out to battered and abused women. And I was chatting with one of the ladies there, and she said, these books are making our jobs infinitely harder because all of the warning signs of a predatory man are being glamorized in this book. And so we're teaching a generation of teenage girls that all of these terrible controlling behaviors are desirable. And she's like, I can't tell you. I mean, the cases I've seen of abusive boyfriends in high schools has just increased tremendously because girls are being taught that we really like Edward Cullen. He's very cute and he's rich. And doesn't he love her so much that must mean what he's doing is good. And so I think you're absolutely right. The consequences of not recognizing the failures of the protagonist can be really devastating.
And I think in this, I've only read one of the Twilight series, so you have to correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't the author presenting Edward as a desirable character rather than with the intention of, oh yeah, he's doing these things, but he's not all that great, but she still loves him? I mean, like, I think that there was some level of her lack of, if I'm understanding correctly, and she was writing him as a desirable character, it was her lack of insight and presenting it as desirable that allowed some of the audience to kind of be wooed into this artificial narrative.
Definitely. And I mean, it definitely plays on the whole good girl saving the bad boy or saving the brooding, Angel and Buffy, like the brooding Angel character. Like that's what they're playing on the whole time for sure, of her kind of redeeming this character. But none of his actions ever change or get better. Instead, he just sucks her into his crazy vampire world. And it normalizes
that a vampire would suck you. Anyways,
weird.
Hey, there you go.
No, but it almost justifies all of his behaviors because then in the end, she becomes a beautiful, sparkly vampire that lives forever and has superpowers and So it actually does the opposite. There's no redemption. There's just glorification of all these terrible things.
Okay, so I never read to the end. So in the end, Van Helsing does not show up?
No, but
what
that would be...
this thing for?
Right? Right? Yeah, seriously. No, I just went to the latest Van Helsing movie that I watched, The Great Homage, put out by Adam Sandler. Have you guys seen that one?
I have not.
It's animated.
I'm trembling now.
Yeah, no, that's a whole thing. You've seen this. You've heard of these. Hotel Transylvania.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So I don't know if you saw Van Helsing in, I think it was Hotel Transylvania 3, but yeah, he's a crazy old man in a wheelchair. Like, he's gone off the deep end, and he's trying to take all the good vampires with him. So,
to be fair, Van Helsing wasn't really very balanced in the original novel either.
No. None of these characters were terribly well balanced in the original. It's been years since I read it. All right. So we have gone from admirable characters to vampires. It's only just a short hop, skip, and a jump from vampires to some other mythical creature. So shall we talk about our zombie apocalypse strategy of the week?
What have you got for us, Mike?
Not a whole lot. As a matter of fact, the person that we're going to have leading us on this expedition is unfortunately a horribly flawed character, and we're going to be in close confines as this person is working through a lot of personal and emotional issues. Granted, they're going to save us in the end, but oh gosh, let's try to learn something about ourselves along the way, shall we, please?
We shall do our best.
Okay, that was weak sauce. Does anybody have a pitch for anything better? Or should I pitch the zombie apocalypse strategy of the week to somebody else?
I don't have anything.
Okay. Joy, only you can save us.
oh no.
Okay.
Oh no.
Then there's no saving us. We're doomed. Okay.
We put our faith in a flawed person, and he has let us down.
Okay. Oh, gosh.
I mean, I would call on Van Helsing, but he's gone off his rocker.
Yeah. Does he subcontract for zombies now?
Maybe. All of this time, we've been looking at the zombies as the bad guys. Maybe they're the protagonists. They're the role models we should be looking up to. What do the zombies have for us?
Oh, my gosh.
Brains. So this is where we rewrite Grimm's fairy tales, and yikes.
I want to do a crazy animated series of Vanessa Helsing, his granddaughter, who's picking up the vampire hunting. But I don't have the money for that, nor do I really have a solid pitch. But
well, I think that wraps it up for us this week. This is Brian, Mike, and not James signing off. We appreciate y'all joining us on this adventure where we learned about our favorite role models, and maybe you should learn to love your zombie. Mike, where can our listeners find us?
You can find us at facebook.com/geekatarms, at geekatarms.com. And we are Arms Geek on what's left of Twitter. And so from all of us here at Geek at Arms, Brian, Mike, James, and Joy, be safe, be blessed, and be geeky.
Thanks for listening to Geek at Arms. Music for this podcast was provided by Incompetech.com. For more, check us out at facebook.com/Geek at Arms. Give us a like and maybe even subscribe to us on iTunes. That would be awesome.
I did it wrong.
That's okay. This magic of editing. Just do it till it feels right.
Okay.
Lots of work for James.
Yes. I'm going to just randomly have like Will Shatner pauses because that would be fun.